Copyright notice, favorite scandal, copyright by Victoria Pinder. This book is a work of fiction. The names, characters, places, and incidents are the product of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual events, business establishments, locales, or persons, living or dead, is entirely coincidental. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording, or otherwise, without the prior written permission of the copyright owner. Chapter 1. Eva Bishop spooned peanut butter out of the container and ate it whole. So much for her pretend life as an actress where she made out she was glamorous. These days, her apartment had a broken air conditioner and her refrigerator was empty. She rubbed her belly. She had to eat. Her baby had to be strong. Somehow, she'd find a way for this baby girl to have more than she'd ever got. A knock on her door made it shake. She put her spoon in the jar and hid it in the refrigerator. It was probably the landlord wondering where her rent was. Right now, she had no idea either. She had no idea about a lot of things. "Eva, let me in." Brandon Campbell's voice echoed in the air. In high school, Brandon had been brooding and superior. That was before he became the now billionaire movie producer. He seemed to have a permanent scowl on his face, and she had no idea how he was so successful. He'd never liked her much. She unlocked her 3 locks, brushed her hair out of her face, and opened the door. "Brandon, go away. You'll want to hear my offer," he said, and walked inside her small studio. The couch had seen better days, though it was left over from her last play that she'd ended up funding entirely on her own, despite going hungry. "I'm not acting anymore." Not that she had any job at the moment, or income, or savings. Not that she'd think about that right now, other than she needed to eat and not go hungry for the next few months. "I know you're pregnant." At least he hadn't thought her fat, though her pseudo-friend Penny had encouraged her by saying no one would suspect it, even after Eva almost ruined Penny's wedding. Brandon hadn't been at that wedding, though she remembered in high school his words, "Good girls needed to protect themselves," after she'd argued with his sister. She narrowed her gaze at the dark-haired, dark-eyed man who haunted her because he always hated everything about her. "Who told you?" "My sister." "Calliope." Great. This was worse than high school, all over again. Chris, the fool who'd impregnated her and still intended to marry Calliope without ever letting the bride know about Eva and him. He had pretty much been the last straw in her dating life. He must have tried to go back to her again. Calliope was smart enough to walk away once before. She swallowed. "She heard it from Chris," said Brandon. "If she goes back to him, then she's a fool." She shook her head. "But I won't say a word to them. I seriously will stay out of their lives forever. I say sue Chris for every penny he's worth." Oh, so Brandon hated Chris too. He must have good judgment then. Brandon's gaze narrowed. "And my sister is very much in love with Michael." "Michael Marshall?" Her voice cracked. Michael was the closest thing she had to a friend who never judged her. He deserved to be in love and happy, and in theory, Calliope was good for him. However, it now meant her last single friend was unavailable to call on a whim anymore. Jay, Penny, Sandy, Wyatt, and now Michael were all happily coupled or engaged. Brandon crossed his hands. Yeah, the dark-haired jerk from high school who had always judged her with his every look had no right to be in her messy, small studio. She'd been too tired to clean up lately, though she was no longer throwing up. She needed to lead him to the door and get back to watching a movie. She brushed the goosebumps on her arms. "Brandon, look, I'm not trying to hurt anyone, and Chris is not part of my life. I would hope not." There was that judgment of his again. She stepped back. She was so tired of facing her mistakes. "So you can go. I hope Calliope and Michael live happily ever after." "Me too." He had warned her off. There was nothing left for him. The minutes ticked past. He should go. She lowered the hands that covered her belly. "I know you've never liked my life choices." Look, it's Christmas, and if there's one person in the world who needs Christmas, it's you. Oh, great. This was far worse then. Brandon Campbell thought he could come in here and save her. Eva and her baby would be okay. He'd tried that once in high school too, but she ducked and hidden until he'd lost sight of her. Now she'd figure out her own life. You don't have to feel sorry for me, Brandon. I'm not a charity case. I know you don't have anyone. In the past, true, she'd never had anyone she could depend on except herself. She had gone to their high school on an acting scholarship, but always knew deep in her gut no one would ever be the foster kid's friend. Though her circle of friends stayed wide, she learned that the hard way. She patted her stomach. That's not true. Soon I'll have my daughter. Eva, how are you going to support her? I'll figure it out. If there was one thing life had taught her, was that there was always a way, and that was truly the Christmas miracle. I'm not looking for any more fast bucks and intend to find a steady job. Good. He came closer and lowered his head. He smelled good, like cinnamon and cedar trees, which threw her off. A second later, he said, "You just gave away the $2 million? Right. How she almost ruined her friends Jay and Penny's wedding on the cruise ship. Jay's mother had offered to pay her an outrageous sum, but to stop his mother, Jay had ended up doubling the offer to $2 million for her silence at a wedding she was supposed to only ever be a guest at. With that money, she made good on everything owed, and she and her baby were going to start fresh. As soon as she found a job, life would be better. She pushed her hair behind her ears and explained, I made good on my promise to pay everyone off from the play. That was a waste. They took chances when they agreed to perform, and it shut down. Brandon was ever the cold-hearted businessman. People had joined her performance on faith, and she'd make it right for them. Everyone had families to take care of. I needed to keep my word. Even if you can't afford the hospital bill. Point for him. Not that she should be taking life points. They weren't even friends. She avoided being near him. He was Hollywood, glitz and glamour, whereas the only part of acting that made her feel anything was the audience applause of a nightly show. She craved it. It was all she ever wanted until she found out she was having a baby. I'm talking to a midwife. She says I can have her at home and save money. Eva, she put her hand up in front of him. He was all judgment, all the time. Don't. I know you hate me. You don't have to be here at all, actually. We have nothing to say to each other. I don't hate you. The words stung. Her gaze flickered to the horrible leftover tree she'd scrounged from someone else's trash, with its flickering lights. Her life might not be fancy, but she didn't need his approval or his help. If he didn't hate her, and he knew everything about her life, he couldn't be smart, and that wasn't good at all. She hadn't even told Michael or any of her friends the entire truth. She crossed her arms. Hate is the wrong word. You look down your nose and pity me. I don't need that. I never did. In high school, I was unhappy with my own life. And if I was rude to you, I think that was more because you were kissing Tommy Pratt. He was my boyfriend. Her pulse raced. He knew. Oh goodness. He knew it all. It would be better if he just hated her. You still call him that? Brandon asked. Her face lowered, and she saw how many of her clothes were on the couch. No wonder he hadn't wanted to sit. Her pulse zapped, and she moved closer to her door. Don't. There's that judgment. You can go. What happened to you on your prom night is why you slept with a man like Chris. Don't start analyzing me. Psychology wasn't supposed to be used as a weapon. In foster care, she'd been one of the lucky ones that finished school and been reasonably safe. Before her foster mother, Mary, had died, she made her go to church on Sundays and pray every night for an hour, but she'd protected her and supported her acting. She'd almost stayed innocent until the end. She reached for the door. Your sister almost married him. Almost, but she smartened up. Now she's with Michael. Okay, she was confused on his intentions again. Brandon made no sense in her place, and her head hurt from trying to figure him out. She pointed toward the door. Either way, it's time you to leave. Again, he came closer to her, but this time she felt safe. Most people who came this close ended up in her bed because she never believed in feelings enough to open up her heart to anyone. Life had taught her no one ever truly kept their word and to judge based on actions. Wait, he stilled and said, "I meant what I said about having a job for you." His line of work was not her specialty, and in her condition, the cameras added pounds. "Why? I've never done movies. I've mostly done stage work. You have the ability, and that's only part of the job anyhow." Part? He was a producer. She was an actress. She lowered her hands to her sides, her gaze narrowed. "What do you want?" "I'm producing a movie starring Matthew Morgan and Jennifer Gonzalez. I need a pregnant villain character and also a spy, which means you're pretty perfect, and we both know you need the money." Acting had always been her saving grace. Perhaps this was her way out of her mess of a life. She paced back and forth until she walked toward the window that faced the back of another building. Wherever Brandon lived must have a nice ocean view, just like all her former classmates. Once, she thought she might fit in their world, but over and over again she learned she never would. Her daughter deserved to have stability, and that was her goal. But a job that paid meant she could save up and finally decide which small town she could disappear to, away from the Miami lifestyle. "Why is she a villain? So you are interested?" "Maybe." A few paychecks paid a few overdue bills. She turned toward him and wondered why a movie producer had such well-built arms. But a second later, she sucked in her breath and realized those muscles were probably necessary for these Hollywood types. Either way, this got her out of a jam. "What's the character?" Brandon spoke down his nose and stared at her. "Laura, your character, shot and killed her husband, and the hero wants to prove it. So it's a game of cat and mouse where you initially sent Maggie, Jennifer's character, to spy on George, Matthew's character. Laura will kill again if necessary, though no one suspects it's you who killed your husband, not until the end." "Laura sounds interesting, but what am I spying on?" "Someone on set has gone way over budget." "That's vague. Who do you think is spending too much money?" "Someone is charging expenses that don't make sense for a movie. If I have a pretend girlfriend to visit on the set, I won't set off the temperamental director or the fiery Jennifer Gonzalez, and people will assume you're the reason I stop by so often." A pretend girlfriend was the best she'd get at a real life. She knew Brandon wouldn't think of her romantically, ever. "Didn't you have a fiancé? 2 years ago, and yes, Grace left me, a long time ago." Brandon probably tried to protect her too. Eva's insides churned because she'd never exactly been good at accepting help or protection from people who were better than her. For her baby, she had to try and trust. Brandon Campbell still offered when he knew what no one else knew. Her heart whispered to let him in, and that, her Christmas miracle, had just knocked on her door and saved her. She swallowed and said, "Okay, I'll do it." "Good. I need you in test shots, starting tomorrow." Test shots meant he was serious. Good. She needed this. She nodded. "What happened to your other actress?" "She didn't test well with Jennifer." Fiery matched what she'd heard about Jennifer Gonzalez, the soap actress about to bloom into a movie star. Some of her co-stars had worked on her television show. Somehow, Eva would find a place on the set, and she needed to be grateful. "Brandon?" His eyes widened. "Yeah? Thanks." Her face felt warm. He placed his hand on his back pocket. "Eva, as I said at the beginning, I know what it's like to be alone at Christmas. With you being pregnant, if you need a friend, you can call me." Brandon's parents had died in high school, leaving him and his sister trust fund babies. But it was probably the fiancé or his life in LA that had changed him. Whatever it was, her baby needed this. "Brandon?" "Yes?" If she spoke about the truth, then maybe she had a shot at more. "You are right. That prom night changed me. I figured." Tommy had invited his friends into the hotel room and no one cared that she'd screamed. The memory flooded her, again. Usually she used this as a reason to break into tears on stage. This time she had a new memory and she whispered, I should also thank you for breaking Tommy's nose. It wasn't enough. He should have gone to jail. He is, she answered. Brandon crossed his arms again. He leaned closer. What? His nearness felt nice. He's in jail for raping another woman. Good. For a few minutes, neither of them said anything. Outside, her neighbor started Christmas music and the melody of Silent Night filled the air. She was in no way anything like the Virgin Mary. But this Christmas she had been thinking about how she must have felt, alone and scared. Brandon broke the spell. Eva, if I ask you out to dinner, you won't get any strange ideas, will you? I want to know you and your baby are properly fed and ready for tomorrow. No one like Brandon would ever really be into her anyhow, but the mostly eaten peanut butter hadn't filled her, and it was all that was in her refrigerator. She nodded and grabbed the blue shawl that covered her belly nicely. Brandon, I've never had a guy as a friend that I've not ended up sleeping with, but I'm willing to give it a try if you are. Let's go, he said as he stepped over a broken chair she'd meant to throw away. As the door to her apartment closed behind her, she now had something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope coursed through her veins, and with luck, this feeling would stay. Chapter 2. Brandon Campbell parked his silver Bentley in the shopping plaza and turned toward Eva. She was nothing like his ex, Grace. Grace was full of life and excitement until he'd almost lost every dime he had on a movie. Luckily, he doubled his money instead, but it had been too late for Grace. She'd left him for a man with deeper pockets. Eva Bishop had disaster written all over her beautiful face, and she knew it, but if he helped her out of her disasters, then he felt justified to ask for her help too. Still, as he stared at her and his pulse went a little faster, he realized he was attracted to her, but he'd keep that under wraps. They unbuckled and passed a few stores until they made it to the restaurant row that overlooked the Intercoastal. Eva bounced beside him and gazed in the shop windows. I love all the Christmas decorations. He dug his hands in his pockets. Every year, I wish I lived somewhere besides Miami or Los Angeles when it's Christmas time. Why? She asked, gazing at him. Her blue eyes were almost gray, and so clear it unnerved him. Eva truly was beautiful, and he normally avoided that type. He coughed and brought himself back. I grew up here. I always wanted a white Christmas, as the song says, but I never had that. She walked a little closer to him. 3 years ago, I was in a play on Broadway. It was the highlight of my life, and that winter I had snow near Christmas. Near her, he felt a sense of belonging with vanilla and cinnamon flavors. He stepped further away to let the feeling go and reached for the first door. Do you like Argentinian? She sniffed the air and stepped out of the walkway. No, the place doesn't smell right. Okay. He had no idea pregnancy made restaurant choosing difficult. He pointed to the next few stops. Should we walk to the other 3 restaurants in this plaza? She nodded and walked beside him. At the next door, she sniffed the air again. This one smells fine. He glanced up and read the sign, Tho Wei, and reached for the door. Chinese it is. Wait, no. She shook her head and stepped away. Probably has too much salt. What? He let the handle go and followed. While they walked to the next one, she said, Salt is bad for the baby. Thanks for being understanding. Fascinated was more like it. At the next door, she stopped and nodded. This one smells okay too. He stayed beside her this time and asked, Is Italian okay for the baby? She pushed her hair out of her face. Yes, sorry about all this. I wasn't always this picky. This time, he reached for the door and she followed him inside. It's fine. I don't normally dine with a pregnant lady. How far along are you? 14 weeks. She can suck her thumb now. Soon Eva would be a mother. Her beauty was enhanced with a glow. A waitress immediately walked them to a table where he waited for her to sit on her side of the booth. And when he was sure Eva was comfortable, he sat opposite her. Once the waitress was gone, he asked, How do you know you're having a girl? I used some of the money for the expensive testing. I need to prepare and make sure she's healthy. Good, at least she hadn't given every dime away without thinking of the baby. And the doctor said she was perfect. The huge smile on her face made him smile too. He needed to shake that off. He'd not fall under her spell. "I'm glad. So, let's talk business," she said the second she opened the menu. He did the same, though he'd order spaghetti with a butter sauce. "Fair enough. If people think we're dating, they will ask if you're the father." Ice raced down his back and he sat straighter. "I don't care." She chewed her lip and held the menu tight. "I haven't told anyone except Chris, the father, and my friends Michael and Sandy." Brandon blinked. Eva was still friends with the high school cheerleader. His sister had told him that Sandra Marshall had come back from a cruise engaged. Brandon's initial plan for the annual Christmas party at Steven's house was to pretend he'd moved on with his life by asking Sandy along, but now that was out of the question. Sandy deserves every happiness in the world, and she'd been in love with Wyatt since I can remember. I had no idea they dated in high school, and she was one of my best friends. She lowered her menu. "You didn't deserve what happened to you at prom. No one does. That's the past." He didn't understand her, but tried again. "I meant, you're stronger than you give yourself credit for." He sipped his water glass. "Never mind." She blinked and stared at him. "Never mind what?" The waitress came and took their order, giving him a few seconds of reprieve. With Eva near, Brandon realized his behavior had reverted to his unhappy high school days, where he walked around with a crush on her that she never acknowledged. No one in Hollywood ever made him feel anything. But Eva dug under his skin, not that he'd tell Eva that. Once the waitress left, he steered the conversation away from anything that might reveal the truth. "You're perfect for the part, and might be the only one I trust on that set." Trust is hard. Her eyebrows lifted as she sipped her water. Once she was done, she put it down and said, "And if you can trust me, that's saying a lot. You hate me." Hate was not how he felt. We went over that. She fixed her hair and the butterfly pendant around her neck. Her cheeks had a blush. She asked, "Okay, but still. Anyhow, back to my question. What if people ask if you're the father?" Eva had this choice. Chris wouldn't offer to protect her. He knew that. He clutched his glass of water. "I'm fine with whatever you want to say." The waitress came and took their order, leaving the question in the air. She still held onto her pendant. She leaned forward. "Well, I wish any decent guy was the father of this child, and despite our history, I know you're one of the most stand-up guys I've ever met. I said no to you in high school because you deserved better than me, and your intensity scared me." "I'm not a saint, Eva, and I'm not that intense. I knew what I wanted, and that was to find my place in the movies." In high school, he'd been jealous and then angry. "You told me to stay away from Tommy. You clearly made your own career outside of your parents' trust fund. You're always there for your sister, and now you've swooped in and helped me out." Right. This wasn't because he was a good guy. If she helped him, it was only natural he'd help her. Fairness made the trade better. He ignored the new version of "All I Want for Christmas Is You" that played on the station. Again, he leaned closer to her and felt his heart stir. This time, he didn't budge. "Do you really want my help?" "Yes." She also scooted closer. Good, a plan formulated fast for the next few weeks. They needed to make dating look as real as possible, and he'd ensure she had a doctor and proper medical treatment at the very least. "Then move in with me. Your home is no place for a pregnant woman. You even have broken glass in the corner." A blush spread across her cheeks and she clutched her pendant again. "I dropped my drinking glass yesterday, but I was too tired to clean it up." The waitress returned with 2 bottles of non-alcoholic beer and their plates. Once the waitress departed, he reached out for her hand. She didn't pull it away. "I have a maid. You'll have your own suite, and besides, people will believe it more that we're dating if you're there." With her other hand, she let go of that pendant of hers. "Is there any other reason beside the movie set that you want me as your pretend girlfriend?" Grace and others had wondered if he was sad enough that he'd quit producing any more movies. The rumor had been asked by more than one investor. Perhaps for a week he had even considered it, but work was the one thing he could still enjoy. His sister Calliope had reminded him to re-find his passions, and he'd follow her advice. He gulped the water. Once he finished, he put it down and asked, Why did you ask that? She lowered her gaze. Something about this struck me as strange. Right, this wasn't a real date. They were hardly even friends. They ate a few bites of their food in silence. He needed to keep this platonic and above board. I need you to come to a producer's party and make everyone believe we're really dating. She let out a sigh and nodded. Oh, good. I thought it had something to do with Chris hurting your sister. Chris Sommers had cheated on his sister, but Calliope was more than fine now. Eva might not be. If he tries to get to you in any way, I will protect you. Her nose wrinkled and she let out a snort. After I get the chance to punch him. That's not the Christmas spirit. He sat straighter. At least Eva seemed to see Chris for what he was. She shrugged, leaned closer to him with a cold anger that he wished his sister had, and said, "He cheated on your sister with me and another woman at the same time. He swore to me that it was over with Calliope and that he was dumped. Then, a week after I slept with him, out of the blue, I received your sister's wedding invitation." They finished their meal. Once he was done, the question that burned through him came out. Why did you sleep with him? With another sigh, she wiped her lips, then she rubbed her belly. Because I was lonely. I was sad and feeling sorry for myself when he found me at that coffee shop everyone in high school used to go to. It was stupid, but the one good thing about it was that I'll never be lonely ever again now. Motherhood had already matured Eva. It was clear she wasn't the same angry teenage girl out to prove herself, and that she had more of a heart. He picked up his glass bottle and tipped it to her. You're going to be a good mom. Now that is my biggest prayer. She picked up her own drink and took a sip. I have no mental basis for what a mother is supposed to be. My parents were great until they died. Brandon hadn't said that in a long time. His sister had idolized their childhood, and he always wanted to remind her to be real. But the truth was, they were good. They finished their food, and Brandon wiped his face the second he was done and asked, "Just to backtrack for a minute, you'll move in with me?" "Yes," she said, and put the bottle down. He waved for the check. "Perfect," he said, and hoped this was a good plan. Eva Bishop was fiery, dramatic, and about to be his pretend girlfriend. With her at his side, this Christmas would be the first time he'd looked forward to the holiday in years. His plan was perfect. Chapter 3. Eva settled in Brandon's Bentley and relaxed her back. The seats were comfortable. They didn't bend her in strange ways like in other cars. It was relaxing. She closed her eyes and let him drive, but she peaked the moment he turned in a different direction from where they came. "Where are we going?" "Home," he answered, like we discussed. "Already?" She had assumed tomorrow. Her palms felt sweaty as she turned her head toward Brandon's profile. His dark hair and dark eyes were striking with his light olive skin and posh suit pants and his blue shirt. Not that she wanted him. She tried to wipe her thoughts. Besides, he'd never be interested in her, and seduction was out of the question and off the plate from now until her baby went off to college. He tapped the wheel. "Did you need anything at your apartment?" "Time." She reached out and brushed her hand on his muscular arm. "Clothes, for one, a toothbrush, a few personal things." He nodded while he drove. "How long will it take you to pack?" 10 minutes, she answered fast, and a second later pursed her lips. So much for asking for time, but then she thought about her apartment. Her broken and old furniture were not the best atmosphere to keep herself from falling. And a nice bed with sheets that weren't tattered was a dream in her imagination. On the next street, Brandon turned the car left and nodded. "Okay, we'll go to your place." Soon they were away from the beach and in her neighborhood town of Hialeah, where the streets confused anyone not born in the city. Brandon navigated fine. Once he'd parked in the parking lot outside her home, she asked, "Brandon, are you sure you want me to move in tonight?" He reached out and brushed his hand on her arm this time. "I want to drive you to the movie set tomorrow and get you into your test shots." Right. This was a job, not a date. He hopped out of the car while she opened her door. A moment later, he was there and offering his hand. She reached out and used him as a launch pad to get up. Once she was sure her and the baby were fine, she brushed her long skirt down. What if the director doesn't think I have what it takes? He likes my money. He doesn't get much of a choice. Brandon followed behind her while they made it to the steps. She held onto the railing. It felt nice to know someone had her back if she fell. Once she'd made it to the top of the stairs, she giggled and thought about tomorrow while she fished out her keys. I've never played the part of the girl who slept her way to the top, or straight out murdered those in her way. This might be fun. Didn't you fund your last play? He asked. Acting was a safe topic. She opened the door wide and let him follow her inside. This time, her gaze landed on her table, held straight with a few books at the bottom. Brandon was right about this wreck. She sighed. I couldn't let the play fall down because the producer bailed when I had an opportunity to do it. So, you know how a cast reacts when the money wants a small thing done. Right. This was just business to him. Her mind was a ping pong right now. Business was all she could handle. She walked into her bathroom and grabbed her toothbrush. Yes, I'm just getting myself mentally ready to be your girlfriend. Got it, he said, as he checked out her small collection of classic plays from Hamlet to Death of a Salesman. She walked to her bedroom where a ring sound interrupted the quiet. It continued, she called out. Your phone is ringing. He followed her. Let it. Can I help you get your things? No. Her twin-size bed wasn't made, and she should have washed the sheets. He stood in the hall. Eva threw her clothes from her plastic bin into her bag and called out, I'm almost done. In her last act, she went to her closet and tried to get her box off the top shelf. She stretched and her fingers brushed the edge. It was the most important thing she had. Her hands accidentally pushed it in the other direction. Brandon stampeded in and reached for it. Don't stretch. Don't hurt yourself or your baby out of pride. Let me help. Without much effort, he handed her the box. Her face felt warm and her heart stirred. Thanks. I need that box. Without opening it, she brought it to her bag. Brandon asked, What is it? The only part of her life that mattered. She swallowed. Photos. It's all I ever had of my parents. I want to bring it with me. Can I see them? No one ever cared enough to be interested. This wasn't the first time she'd played the part of beautiful girlfriend, but even her last friend she had done this for hadn't asked her personal questions. The pictures were private. Her pulse raced a little. She nodded, opened the box, and explained, Yeah, I guess. No one normally asks. Brandon shuffled the pictures and without hesitation held up one. This is your father? Wow, perceptive. Her entire body relaxed near him and she leaned closer. How did you know? You have his eyes. It would be nice if that were true. Without another thought, she went through the photos in his hand and picked out another. This is my mother. This was their wedding picture. His voice was deep. What happened to them? Car accident 3 months after I was born. Didn't you have at least one set of grandparents? She shook off the instinct to lie and instead told the truth. No, neither of my parents had anyone as far as I know, because no one came for me. He handed her the photos again. Well, you look like your mother. I often wonder about them, and I always keep this small box with me, wherever I go. She stuffed the box in her bag and a second later reached for her laptop. The last thing she needed. Done. Nothing else mattered here. She zipped the bag. Brandon leaned forward. How did you get the pictures? Eva had spent her teenage years rebelling and evading all of Geraldine's religious demands. My foster mother saved them for me. She was super religious but always supportive, even when the state came in and gave her trouble. I'm sorry she died. Brandon reached for her bag and she let him. The last thing she needed was to hurt herself. Me too. She gave me my butterfly necklace because she knew I loved them as a girl. I have her picture in there too. They made their way out of her small studio, and she turned to scan the place. It was a wreck. The green couch had a slice in the back of the fabric that she now noticed was visible in the front too. She'd not missed this place. It had never really served as more than a landing pad for the past few years. Once this job was over, she'd not return here. She blinked and followed him to the door. This is everything. Brandon opened the door for her. Okay, let's go. Eva slipped her key off the ring and would email her landlord. She was gone for good. Without much fanfare, they drove to the beach, and she realized he turned off 395 onto Bridge Street, and that they were heading to the exclusive island. She sat straighter. None of her friends had lived in the star-studded isle that housed the rich and famous. She spotted a few amazing-looking mansions, and a few minutes later, Brandon pulled into a 2-story one reminiscent of Tara's in Gone with the Wind. The gates opened to a roundabout that could house 20 cars, and off to the side was a 3-car garage. Brandon hit a button to open the garages, and they pulled into the first one. As they walked out of the garage, the sound of an engine turning off reverberated in her ears. The noise of the car and the dark sparked memories of prom night. Tommy had opened the door and let his friends in the hotel room, and they had used a battery-operated rabbit. She shivered and hugged herself while she slowed down. She was safe, and this was Brandon's garage. There is a car in your driveway. Calliope. He pointed to the window, and she saw the blonde hair. Eva had cheated with Calliope's fiancé, even if she hadn't known until she received the wedding invitation from the bride. She ducked her head and felt her body was warm again. This was her own doing. Perhaps I should wait in the garage. No. Brandon gently placed his arm on her shoulder. My sister won't judge you. She followed him out. It's not a family trait? No, she's the bubbly one. He let Eva's shoulder go, but offered her his arm. Calliope's probably here to check up on me. Come. She swallowed and stared at the front door. This was the start to the next chapter of her life. She'd make the money and go. She laced her hand around his arm and followed him inside. Brandon put her bag near the second door of a double entryway, and once he'd closed it behind them, he called out, Calliope, what brought you by? Eva's entire body felt like it might shatter. Her palms were sweating again. Without even time to blink, Calliope came over and hugged Brandon, and a fraction of a second later, she hugged her too. Brandon, Eva, how are you? The bright-eyed stare of the woman she hurt was like a dagger in her heart. I'm good. A slow smile grew on Calliope's face. Her head darted while she gazed at the pair of them. And you're here? In my brother's home? Brandon had a fatherly voice when he said his sister's name. Calliope. Calliope flipped her hair and ignored her brother as she took Eva's arm and walked with her. Brandon's overprotective by nature. Michael says you're still his friend too, so I'd like for us to go out and get to know each other. Michael, Jay, Sandra, Penny were still her friends, despite how she betrayed all of them at some point. Forgiveness came easier for other people, it seemed. Calliope had been a high school acquaintance, but never a friend. Perhaps it would be nice to start over and only make female friends for a while. She kept her head down. Are you sure? Calliope squeezed her arm. Positive. How about tomorrow? Brandon answered. We have all-day plans. Calliope waved him off. Then tomorrow evening, we'll do a double date so Eva doesn't think I'm completely crazy. Then this weekend, shopping? Determination ran in the family's veins. Eva held her stomach and felt for her baby. Sounds lovely. Thank you. Calliope let go of her and began to walk towards the front door. She stood between the first and second doors. Okay, well, I should go. Brandon opened the first one, held it open, and called out. Wait, you never said why you were here. Calliope stopped, opened her Valentino pocketbook, and handed her brother a stack of papers in an envelope. I wanted to leave this business plan I received with you to let you decide what I should do. Without a glance at it, he placed the envelope on a nearby lamp table. I'll look at it in the morning. Perfect. Night. Calliope took off for the door and waved goodbye. Brandon returned to the double doors, locked them, and grabbed her bag. My sister avoids all discussion about money. She claims she doesn't have the head for numbers. She depends on me to track her trust fund and spending habits, and she's starting to depend on her new boyfriend as well. The white living room had a mirror that looked like it would reflect the sun into the house, and a nice white fireplace. He walked her bag out of the main living area and through open-aired doors, past a dining hall and into a Florida room where again the room should catch the sun beautifully. Then he walked her up the stairs. It's nice that she has you in her corner. Where am I putting my bags? He opened the door to an elegant and light bedroom that overlooked the intracoastal waterways, and beyond that, the Atlantic Ocean, with a huge wraparound balcony. She peeked her head next door and saw a bathroom that was bigger than her apartment, also giving her an amazing view of the ocean from the bath. He dropped her bag on a drawer built inside the walk-in closet. This will be your room. When she'd stayed with other men, it was usually in their beds. Having her own room was nice. She felt goosebumps with a zap of attraction toward him, but she ignored the feeling. This looks great, thanks. He leaned against the wall. My room is down the hall. You can take the hall or the balcony if you need me. Can I get you anything? Brandon acted different to every other guy she'd ever met. She lowered her head and told herself to be brave. Her face felt flushed. Yes, tomorrow we have to act like boyfriend and girlfriend. And? He lifted her chin, and she stared into his deep brown hues. Once again, the feeling of being safe hit her hard. This was it. She swallowed and decided that if she never asked, she'd never find out. I think you should kiss me goodnight so we don't have an awkward moment in front of anyone tomorrow. His eyes widened, and she turned her head. He must think her crazy. Here she was, pregnant with another man's child. Her face felt hot, and she was about to melt at his feet. Finally, he said, "Fair enough." She turned toward him. His calloused hands brushed against the soft skin of her cheek. She lost her breath. She closed her eyes and his lips met hers. For once, she felt like she truly belonged. His lips were harder than she thought, and so much more delicious. Her lips tingled when he stopped. She swayed a little. "Wow," she said. "Good night, Eva." He closed her bedroom door and walked out of the room. Every other guy would have insisted to come into her bed. She hugged herself and imagined her life if she hadn't been so stupid years ago to say no to Brandon when he'd asked her to the prom. Until this moment, she had forgotten that. Now, all she wanted was a second chance. Chapter 4. Today, Brandon put his plan in action. The movie studio would go dark at Christmas, so they only had 2 days to figure out where the money was going. He paced the hall. Eva's bedroom door was closed. He looked at the time on his phone. They needed to go. He knocked on her door and called inside. "Are you ready?" She slipped out of her bedroom and he noticed her bed was made. Maid service wasn't on property yet, so she had done that herself. He should show her the elevator. Last night he'd made her walk like an idiot. The baby bump was clearer to him this morning. He took her hand and led her to a small door. She seemed to breathe a sigh of relief once he opened it to reveal the elevator. Seconds later, they were on the first floor. She grabbed fruit and a tea from the counter. That wasn't enough, so he handed her a piece of toast. She stopped and took a bite. A huge smile lit up her face. "This tastes great." He left a note for his cook to make up a few loaves of fresh bread for the next few days because he gave his staff Christmas Eve and day off. Eva ate a second piece and nodded that she was ready now. He led her toward the door. "I feel weird walking out of the house without makeup. In a play, we are often overdone and makeup likes us to come in with our base already on." He opened the doors for her and led her to the garage. "You will be high def once you get in the chair. Right now, you're already glowing." He helped her inside his Bentley and moments later, they were driving out of his property and onto Bridge St. Eva snacked on a banana in silence. He glanced at her as they drove. She truly was radiant. But as they neared the studio, she grew fidgety and asked, "Are you surprising the director with me, or does he know?" He parked in front and leaned closer to her. "Everyone knows I'm bringing you in today for test shots." Her big blue eyes beseeched him. "When did you tell them?" "Before I knocked on your door last night," he answered, and stepped out of the car. They needed to go, but the frown on her face made him pause. Without a word, she relaxed again and took his offered hand to help her stabilize where she stood. The bright morning sun of Miami hit them, but it wasn't humid yet. She refused to let go of his arm. What if I'd refused? Christmas with Eva might be nice. He brushed her hair out of her eyes and let her hold him close. I never thought about that. Why? Her lips pursed and the urge to kiss her again hit him hard. She was cute when she was nervous. He stayed close to her and his body hardened and he ached to kiss her. I knew you gave away every dime. She looked at him and he swore she wanted a kiss too with how she asked, how? A few of your former coworkers now work on set, he answered. The tingles in his lips were something he hadn't felt in years. He assumed he'd never feel anything powerful about anyone. And you've done it before. She lowered her head and leaned on his chest. He felt how she shook. I'm slightly nervous. I've only done stage work. This is all different. Not even his sister seemed so vulnerable. Brandon hugged Eva because he didn't know what else to do, and for a second he swayed her to keep her in his arms. Eva was vulnerable, which made her different. It might be the pregnancy hormones that movies talk about. You've always been a star in the making, Eva. A blush bloomed on her cheeks while she looked into his eyes and batted those long lashes at him. About last night, Brandon, every muscle in his body stiffened. Yeah, you're a good kisser. You too. He leaned forward and met her lips. She still tasted sweet and better than any ice cream flavor he'd had. For a moment, he forgot everything else except Eva was now his. Once the kiss ended, he hugged her once more and said, "Let's go in." With another nod, she straightened her shoulders and followed him. He offered her his hand as he held the door for her. The second they walked inside, people were everywhere. In makeup and wardrobe, they mostly hovered in the corner, but everyone stared at them. He needed to get Eva to the director. The male lead walked in the opposite direction with papers in his hand. Brandon stopped him. Hey, Matt, do you know where Dimitri is? Matthew Morgan smiled and showed off his $20 million dimples. He's on the Boardroom Showdown set. Is this our new Laura? Today's her screenshots. Brandon answered while he pushed Eva a little forward. Matthew smiled at her and said, I'll be ready in 10 minutes for our camera shot. Brandon led Eva forward and through the upcoming coffee shop setup toward the boardroom. Once they made it outside the half a room, the other star of the movie, Jennifer Gonzalez, circled behind them. She didn't introduce herself. Instead, she said, She has dark hair. Yes, Eva said and turned while she held her stomach. Jennifer gazed at the pair of them. I thought our villain was going to be blonde and blue-eyed. Eva stayed close to Brandon and said, I have blue eyes. Well, I wanted a blonde. Jennifer crossed her arms. The last two girls we tested were blonde. He placed his hand on the small of Eva's back. You're not the director, Jennifer. A second later, Brandon turned away without a goodbye to the star and asked one of the crew where the director was. Behind him, he heard Jennifer ask Eva, So, are you having the producer's baby? Yes, Eva answered. His entire body felt lighter in that moment. She trusted him to protect her. He lifted his head a little higher and let the teenage boy that used to live inside him feel the moment Eva claimed him. But he told himself not to let that get to him, and he ignored how his heart seemed to grow in his chest. The crew member pointed to the camera room. I see. Jennifer lowered her hands as Brandon rejoined them and said, Then I'm sure the tests are just a formality. She turned and walked away. He leaned closer to Eva and whispered in her ear, So, we're telling people I'm the father? She put her hand around his neck to ensure that they were as quiet and alone as they could be in the crowd. She placed her hand on his cheek. You said it was up to me, and you're a better man than Chris could ever be. Last night and today's kisses awakened something inside him he thought had died. If Eva wanted his help, he'd be there for her. The director popped out of the camera room with one of the crew and walked toward them. Brandon stepped out of her arms, but stayed close. Dimitri, this is my Eva. Dimitri handed him a script, and without a second to breathe, he immediately spoke to Eva. Are you sure you want to work on a movie set in your condition? She nodded her head and held her stomach. I bring authenticity to the character that no one else will. He glanced at her stomach. Your priors are all on stage. No one gets audience approval here for years, and movies are boring compared to plays. I'm looking forward to finding out how acting works filming small scenes at a time." She held out her hand to shake his. "I am excited to join you." From the look on Dimitri's face, he was clearly more impressed in the 10 seconds of talking to Eva than he was about half of the studio changes that had been pushed forward. Dimitri snapped his finger. "Well, let's see if the camera likes you. Hair, makeup, be right here in 15 minutes." He gave a cursory nod at Brandon and went to go talk to the cameraman again. Brandon walked with Eva toward the section set for actors and said, "I'll get you a dressing room and then pick you up later. Let's talk about why you're here. Is there anyone you suspect? Right now, just keep your eyes open. I'll read more into this and be on set more tomorrow." He whispered and wrapped his hands around her. If anyone saw them, they'd assume they were saying goodbye. "Bye," she whispered and closed her eyes. Like a child offered his favorite treat, his lips met hers again, and she still had a kick to hers that made him feel powerful enough to conquer the world. He hugged her closer, and the moment he felt his body harden, he let himself believe she was his as the rest of the world disappeared. Once their kiss ended, he let her go. She swung her hips as she walked down the hall. He turned to leave, but Matt Morgan came beside him and handed him a script. Brandon looked at the now matching scripts he had as Matt said, "Brandon, I wanted to talk to you." "What's going on?" "It's the script. Dimitri and I were talking and we think we should film 2 endings in case the audience rejects the original." As the producer, he needed to sometimes overstep a director and ensure that the audience's expectations were fulfilled. Directors and actors sometimes saw something he overlooked, but often they'd try to hold out on some artistic detail, and it was his job to deal with the studio executives. He lifted his eyebrow. "I've okayed the original." Matt crossed his arms. "Just read the rewrite. Tonight it seemed he had homework." "Okay, I will read this fast." He raced to his office in the executive suites across the street from the studio and went to work. At some point his stomach grumbled, and he knew he'd pay for this soon, but he continued his work. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve, and he now had a live-in date. The next time he looked away from his desk, the sun was on the other side of the window, but most of the work was now done. He was about to close his computer when his sister called. "So, Brandon, did you read the proposal?" "No." For once, he trusted his sister not to be impulsive. "I'm surprised at you," she said. "Things are moving that fast with Eva?" "Yes. One day at a time, Calliope, but I'm buying her a present for tonight. I'm sure you both have Christmas plans." His sister knew the truth most didn't. "We've not firmed up anything. But Calliope, we're not telling anyone Chris is the father of her baby." "Got it, but if you're not doing anything after we get dinner, I'd like for us all to get together with Michael, Sandy, Wyatt, Jay, and Penny for coffee. They are more Eva's friends, so I'm hoping you come too." True. In high school, he'd nominally known Jay and Wyatt, but they were 2 years younger than him. Tonight, it seemed he'd not get much alone time with Eva. He blinked and looked at his email that dinged and said, "I'll talk to you soon. I always forget my brother is Mr. Hollywood. See you in a few hours." Once he hung up the phone, he read the email closer. Tomorrow, when he went to the studio with Eva, he'd see the special effects director, Harris. With this spreadsheet, Brandon had proof the numbers from his department weren't adding up. This wasn't a science fiction movie, but a contemporary drama, so the effects shouldn't be this high. The alarm on his phone rang, and he knew it was time to go. He locked up his office and found his way back to the set. Once he walked in, he saw most of the cast and crew saying goodbye. He continued on to the dressing room area to find Eva. The moment he walked into the new dressing room, he caught his breath. Eva turned and stared at him with those big blue eyes of hers. "Eva, you look stunning." She stood from the desk where she was highlighting her script. Her hair was made for a fancy party out. She blushed and stared at him. "I remembered we were going out tonight, so I asked the makeup lady to help me out. Everyone here is really nice, and that Jennifer is passionate about her work." Jennifer was the possible breakout star in this movie. Her name was growing on television, and she would appeal to the audience. She might be the next big star, though it was possible Eva outshone her on set. He nodded. I hope she translates well to movie audiences. She came and kissed his cheek while she said, and Matthew, he's a dream. Her words left him cold even if her kiss warmed his cheek. What? He's put together, nice, determined, and clearly the one the director respects. None of that was a reason for the jealousy that shot through his spine. Brandon kept his voice low. He has me reading an updated script. She packed her small pocketbook, and without a blink, she took his arm. And his stomach growled again. He led her out of the dressing room and out toward his car. I'll finish it tomorrow. I had a lot to do today. The second the door opened, the afternoon light from the sky was already fading. Miami never looked peaceful to him. Eva didn't blink. She waited for his help into the seat. Well, where are we going with your sister? If she was to pretend to be his girlfriend, there was no question she needed to look like a star. He thought fast. His sister and her new fiancé would meet them in an hour. We're stopping and getting you a designer dress, as tomorrow night is Christmas Eve. After work lets out and the studio goes dark for a few days, I was wondering if you and I might do something fun that day. She nodded, and her agreement made him feel like a teenager again. His heart raced. The moment he started the car, she patted her stomach. I'd love to. I love Christmas and want to start figuring out traditions this year to have for my baby. For a moment, he felt part of a family, but he knew better. He hadn't been, not since his own parents died and no Christmas after that. Even when he watched out for his sister, he had never felt whole. However, since he'd been looking out for Calliope, he'd always pasted a smile on his face. But that was all his family duty ever was. He pulled into the mall near the highway that had a Neiman Marcus. His sister approved of this place. We're here. Let's go shopping. He stood and raced around to help her out of the car. Without thinking, he leaned down and kissed her. She swayed into him for a second, and for a second after she used his arm muscles to steady herself. What was that for? Eva was everything he never wanted but secretly craved. He'd not say that, but he told her the truth. I needed to remember if earlier was my imagination. I wish you were this baby's father. She looked forward and took his arm. He wished the same thing, but he shouldn't, so he shook it off. Eva was the one about to be a parent, not him. He wasn't a real part of it. Let's go. I don't want to keep my sister waiting. Chapter 5. In the dressing room, Eva picked up a sixth dress to try on. Brandon hadn't stopped at a maternity store, so everything fit awkwardly. She hoped the simple swing dress would work. It was time to go. She held it closer, threw it over her head, and decided it would do. At least it hid what seemed more like fat than baby, and a moment later, let herself out. Brandon's eyes brightened when he saw her. She felt her pulse zip, so she glanced away. My friends are getting together for coffee afterwards. Can we go? Calliope already told me, he said and glanced at his phone. She couldn't complain that he was working. She nodded and returned to the dressing room. He took a seat outside while she changed. She spoke through the door, picked up the lightest dress she'd held in a long while, and threw the dress over her head. Jay and Alice are back in town from their honeymoon. I almost ruined their wedding, so I want to make sure they are still my friends. What did you do? His question haunted her. Her palms sweated and her heart sped faster. Really? I thought you knew because you knew Jay paid me $2 million. She heard him stand closer to the door and could see his shoes underneath the drape that separated them. I didn't know why. I knew what my sister told me. She threw the dress over her head, fixed her butterfly necklace that her foster mother had bought her, and said, but she wasn't on the ship where Jay and Penny married. She was about to marry Chris? Yes, we came to Mexico. I saw you, but with my sister's wedding fiasco, I didn't have much time. I saw you were making sure Chris could not find your sister. The memories hit her. She'd stayed in the hotel for a day, but every second it felt like the room was caving in on her and that she needed to pay everyone back. The money burned through her. She stared at his shoes. Okay, so Jay's mother didn't want them to get married. She offered me $1 million. As I knew I owed people about $2 million for the failed production I talked people into performing in. You took the money? Jay doubled it for me not to ruin the wedding with his mother's lies. I told myself it was just an acting job, but we both know it was wrong. She threw the drape away and stared into his eyes. She had to know if he judged her. His brown hues gave her the sense he cared. You look beautiful. He blinked and reached for her hand. Again, you didn't sign a contract making you personally responsible for the play's performance. Shows close all the time. I self-funded because I believed the story was timely. She held up her hand as a wall between them. Irregardless, now you're from Miami. He rolled his eyes and stepped back. She nodded. Yes, the misspoken word was absolutely a Miami trait. She made a motion to change, but he shook his head and directed her to pack. She followed and continued. Chapter 6. Eva stood outside the old coffee shop where she spent every day of her high school with her friends. Today felt like years ago. She gazed in the window and saw most of the people she'd spent years with already gathered around the same tables. Now, she turned and stood with Brandon. He was everything she dreamed about and never found in a man, and like all men, he wanted to escape. She refused to cry over this. Instead, she steeled her spine and said, "We'll stay for 20 minutes, and then let's go home." "We can stay longer if you want," he said, though his voice was empty of any emotion. No. It was better to take a cold shower and tell herself that her hormones were out of whack today. Brandon wasn't the guy for her, and she didn't need one. Soon she'd be a mom, and that was all that mattered. We both have a busy day tomorrow, and if it's our last day as a pretend couple, then I want to make sure we have a good time. He lowered his head. Eva, don't look so sad. Darn. She had vowed not to cry, but her cheeks were wet and it wasn't raining. She quickly brushed her tears away. I'm not sad. I just cry easier these days. Don't take these tears seriously. I don't. Perhaps the extra tears and how her voice became weaker went against what she said. He came closer. This is what we talked about, and I'm grateful for the job and for our time together. Grateful was a good word. She had no right to want more, even if his kisses surprised her. Brandon Campbell was in a different league, and they both knew it. He looked in the window. It's strange that everyone thinks we're a couple. I wish that we were a real couple. She'd not finished that sentence out loud. She was done chasing men who didn't want her. Her daughter deserved a mother who respected herself. She didn't have to pass on the abuse she went through and acted on. What? He asked near her ear, and her skin grew goosebumps. For a second, she wished for a kiss. The sense of being his wasn't right. She told herself to stop. She shook her head. Never mind. Let's go inside and pretend to be happy. Eva, wait. He reached out for her wrist and stopped her. She turned toward him and ignored that his touch made her warm with anticipation. What? What if it wasn't pretending? He asked. His brown eyes had sparks of life. This wasn't all in her head? Her heart grew faster. What do you mean? His voice was steady. I've thought more about our day as a date than acting a part, and I'd like to see where this goes without faking anything. The sense of home and belonging overwhelmed her. She lowered her head as new tears of happiness formed. I'd like that, but I will still help you on set. He brushed her tears off her cheeks this time and held her closer. Me too, and I want you to stay with me until you've sorted out what happens next. You cannot go back to where I found you. Between them was real and honest then. She licked her lips and let the cedar scent of him calm her. Let's celebrate Christmas together. How is that for a start? Perfect. He looked over her and toward the window again. I think your friends are wondering why we're still out here. Her cheeks still wet, she stood on her tiptoes and lowered her eyelids. Let them see this. Her lips met Brandon's, and once again, it felt like they were alone in the world. His kiss empowered her, and she wrapped her arms around his neck to hold on as he kissed her back. Eventually, their kiss ended, but she stayed in his arms while he led her inside. Brandon walked them to 2 seats next to his sister and Michael. Calliope asked them, "What were you two talking about?" Brandon shook his head and stared at Michael. "How my parents died holding hands, and it's caused my sister's romantic tendency." Calliope rolled her eyes. "Hey, I object," Eva joked. "Your brother is a sweetheart, so it probably affected him too." A huge grin grew on Calliope's face, and she placed her hand in Michael's. "And it made my brother date a lot of women who weren't worth his time. You are the exception, Eva. The fact we can have a discussion at all is a good thing." Eva's pulse raced as she thought about Brandon on his own. She turned her attention toward Penny and Jay and asked, "So, how was the honeymoon?" Penny stayed close to Jay, but she had a huge smile on her face. "Amazing. We needed to get away without our mother's involvement. Now we're pregnant, we hope things will settle down." Eva realized her baby would now have her own best friend. "You're pregnant?" Penny nodded. "Yes, with twins." Brandon leaned forward and said, "So, you and Eva are having children at the same time?" Alice blinked and stared at Brandon with new interest. "Wait, you and Brandon?" Not everyone at the table knew everything. In time, she'd tell her friends, but now was not the time. She tugged her ear. It's a complicated story. We're giving ourselves time to breathe and adjust. Once your baby arrives, everything is going to change. I'm happy for you, Eva." Right. Penny and Jay would demand the best of everything, and her baby, if she was going to stay with Brandon, her baby should have the best too. She lowered her head because that thought proved she shouldn't be with Brandon. "He deserved love," Eva asked. "Do you have a good doctor to recommend? I'm looking for a better one these days," Penny said. "Sure, Jay's cousin recommended Oliver Bentley. He's been super great to us and we have no complaints." Oliver Bentley. She took out her phone and wrote his name as a note so she wouldn't forget. Tomorrow she'd make an appointment. Perfect. "I'll text you his contact info," Penny said and took out her phone. A moment later, she had his phone number. Without looking at Brandon, Eva stood from the table. "We have to get going." Brandon jumped out of his seat and followed her, but took his time saying goodbye to everyone. Penny said, "Talk to you later and Merry Christmas, Eva. You deserve to be happy." Friends were important. She needed to keep them, but she also needed Brandon. "See, I kept my promise of 20 minutes. They walked to his car in silence. Before they drove off, he asked, "So, what do you want to do for the rest of the night?" She slipped her platforms off her feet. "Anything?" "Yes," he said while he drove onto Biscayne Burved. "I'm boring." He thought she wanted to go out again. She let out a sigh. "Go home and put my feet up. Tomorrow we have a busy day, and spending a few hours with you and my feet propped up is my dream." He glanced at her toes and saw her bare feet. "Your feet hurt?" "They're killing me," she answered. He steered them toward the highway that would bring them home. "So this doctor you intend to see has the same name as my car." She lifted her eyebrow and joked, "Who knows, maybe your car is a transformer." He winked back. "So you do know pop culture. I thought you Broadway types were always serious, wearing black and discussing how the rest of us don't understand true art." "Misconception, though we're serious half the time," she answered before her phone rang. She opened her pocketbook and looked at the display. "Chris is calling." Brandon's face darkened. "Don't answer." "I think I should," she said. Until today, she hadn't heard from Chris. She'd received the wedding invitation that let her know all about how much of a liar he was, and she'd left a voicemail about her pregnancy. Now he'd seen her and called. Perhaps he had his head on straight concerning her daughter. "Hello?" "Eva, we have to talk," Chris said fast. It was why she answered. She twirled a piece of her hair as her heart whispered Brandon was the better man for her. Her finger intertwined with Brandon's. "What is there to say? I want my baby in my life." Boom! Her heart felt like it was thrown on the floor and run over by a car. She stopped playing with her hair, felt a cold dagger that pierced her skin, and sat straighter. "Chris, you're having a baby with Roxana, I believe her name was. Your almost wedding was quite illuminating because I saw how you told Calliope that you love her and want to be with her even after that revelation. My baby deserves the best, not leftovers." Roxanne had a miscarriage. Well, he at least spoke to his other baby mother. Roxanne had interrupted Calliope's wedding to Chris with her announcement. Eva had intended to sit there and watch in silence in Mexico. Like the bride, she never knew Roxanne existed until that moment either. "I'm so sorry for her. She made me want to be a father." At least someone got through to him. For a second, she glanced at Brandon, who steered her onto his street. "Look, Chris, you lied to me. I don't want you around. Our baby deserves to have both parents." Chris would never be any sort of father to her daughter, and it was best to not let her baby ever get disappointed. "My baby deserves to have people in her life she can depend on. I have to go. I want my baby, and I have money to bring this to court." She hung up the phone and her heart raced. What if he took her to court and proved that she was unfit to be a mother? She closed her eyes and tried to tell herself to breathe. Brandon parked the car in his garage and placed his hand on her knee. What did he want? Once the garage door closed, this time no memories flashed and she felt safe enough to answer. "My baby. I can't let that happen. He won't get you or your baby. Can I ask one question?" One question more wouldn't kill her. She swallowed and tried to stay calm. "Yeah, I know you said Chris lied to you about Calliope, and I believe you. But what did you ever see in that guy to begin with?" Inside the dark garage and in the car, she felt the truth come up to her heart, like it was a mouth cleanser for her soul that made her breathe easier. This was also why Brandon would eventually leave her too. "I have bad taste. I'm a magnet for unreliable men. So I'm a step up," he said, and leaned over her to unlock her door. Once again, she could taste the salt of his kiss on her lips, though he hadn't kissed her. If Brandon was the one she was tied to for eternity, then she'd be happy. "You're in a class all by yourself. Good. I hate competition," he said, and opened his car door. The second he flipped on the light, she followed him inside the house. She was his, if he truly wanted her. He closed the door, and for tonight she let herself hope this was possible. Brandon was the best man she'd ever known. Chapter 7. Eva woke and heard a parrot outside her window. She sat and stared at the green bird on the balcony railing. Her stomach growled. She needed to make sure her baby had enough to eat. Today, she'd make an appointment to go see the recommended doctor. Right now, she'd ensure she had enough food. She cleaned herself up, found some clothes, and headed downstairs. Once she made it to the first floor, she could hear typing on a computer. She turned and followed the noise. At a door to what must be an office. Judging from the desks she spotted inside, she stuck her head in and saw Brandon. Her heart swelled as she pushed it open and leaned against the frame. "You're up early." "Eva, I thought you'd sleep more," he said, and put the script down that was in his hands. She wandered inside and sat opposite him. "I was hungry," he finished typing on his laptop and said, "Okay, give me 1 minute to write this email and I'll join you." "What are you doing?" she asked, and stared at the movie script of her new movie, Damaged Obsession. He pushed the script on his desk forward and hit send to his email. "Finishing the new script. So, what do you think?" she asked. Matt Morgan, the star, had paced the set with the director yesterday and spoke quietly about the changes. She'd stayed out of it. Contban picked up his pen and signed his name on the script. "I like it and I'm going to approve it." I emailed Matt and the director and asked them to send the computer file. Soon she'd get the script and learn every line, but for now she stared at it. "So what happens to Laura?" Contban stood. "Jennifer's character kills her." "What?" she asked as she imagined filming a death scene. She would one day laugh over the silliness with her daughter. At least, she hoped so. Brandon put his pen down and said, "It makes sense as it's her only way to stay alive." Laura ends up kidnapping her before that, though, and it's the only way she can stop her and get out alive. She laughed and rubbed her belly. What happens to her baby? Jennifer and Matt's characters adopt the boy. They were the two heroes in the movie. Laura was the villain. Chris popped into her mind and a cold wind felt like it inched up her back. As long as this isn't parallel to my life, I can't let Chris scare me with his money. Brandon walked around the desk and leaned on it in front of her. Being poor is not a crime, Eva, though you have me in your corner now and I won't let anyone bully you. Thanks, she said and reached for his hand to stand. He stopped her and said, "Give me 1 second. I want to get something for you from the other room. Wait here." She stepped closer to the desk and picked up the script. "Sure, do you mind if I peek at the script?" "Go ahead," he called out from the closet. She gazed at a folder with her name on it and picked it up from the files on his desk. "What's this?" She read her entire life story on a dossier, complete with pictures from the last year and her one night with Chris. Brandon walked out of the closet and waved a small box in the air. "I found it. What are you reading?" She finished reading everything and wrung her hands. "Your file on me. You said you knew I was pregnant because of your sister." "I did. It's true," he said, while he hugged his box in front of his chest. She handed him the manila folder with her name on it. "You have everything about my life in this file, including who worked on my play and who I gave money to." "Yeah." His face turned red. "No." Her hands clenched into fists. This was too much. She pointed to the file again. "And my relationship with Chris. It's how I met him the hour after the cast farewell after party. You even have pictures. How did you get this?" He took a step closer to her, but she stepped away. "I hired a PI to get all your information before I hired you." Her head pounded. She rubbed her temple. If they had a shot, then they needed to trust each other. "Brandon, you didn't tell me." He placed the box on his desk and never blinked while he stared at her. "Eva, we went to high school together, but we've not been friends until now. Do you honestly think I'd knock on a stranger's door without arming myself with information?" Friends. He thought they were at least friends. Her body trembled, though the logic of what he said pierced through her throbbing head. "Did you hire me because I was talented, or because you have a vendetta against Chris?" "What?" He blinked. Everything became laser-focused now in her mind. His sister, Calliope's wedding in Mexico, and how Brandon had chased his sister down the aisle to ensure she was safe. No one had ever done anything like that for Eva, and now Brandon was here. She picked up the next file on his desk with the name Roxanne and read it. Inside her mind, she swore she heard the sound of ding, ding, ding. She sighed. "You also knew Roxanne lost her baby. He humiliated your sister, but she's over it. We're all over him. Why aren't you?" "He has no right to ruin people's lives," Brandon said and crossed his arms. It was one thing to look out for his sister, but this went too far. "Brandon, this isn't normal. Look, he stole a lot of money from Calliope. It's not just about humiliating her. And when I hired the PI, I thought she might go back to him. I needed to protect her and show her the truth if it came to that. I want to make sure he loses what he stole." Money was the bottom line with most people. Her heart felt like it plummeted. "Then have the police deal with it. Calliope won't press charges." She stepped further out of the room. This was too much. She needed fresh air. "This is how you knew what happened on prom night. It was in the file." "No. That part was me filling the PI in for a full report. You came to school on Monday and you never confided in anyone, but I knew Tommy and his friends." Her chin felt like it was loose and tears threatened to leak from her eyes again. "You should have told me you ran a background check. And you should have told people what happened then and stand up for yourself and your baby now." "What do you mean?" "I'm sorry." Ava, don't let your anger at me get in the way of your logic. You have the right to get a monthly child support check from him. If she put what happened with Chris on paper, she'd be tied to that man forever. They weren't even friends. They had no relationship. Part of her had wanted to pretend Brandon was the father so badly that she'd put his name on the birth certificate. She lifted her chin. I don't want to put his name on the birth certificate. His eyebrows went lower. Why? So she had $12.86 in her account at the moment. Brandon knew her entire life savings. Like you said, being poor isn't a disease. My daughter and I will be better off without any guy who doesn't care. He uncrossed his arms and came toward her again. He called you and said he's going to take you to court. No. It was better to keep her distance. Her heart pounded in her chest. Brandon couldn't be trusted, and she should have protected herself. Once we finish the movie, I'll move. I'll change my name if I have to, and disappear. It was what I intended to do before you knocked on my door anyhow. He picked up the box again. Where would you go? You were born and raised here. He intended to give her something. Was it another lie? She stared at the red paper of the box with the white bow. She let him come a little closer as she said, perhaps that's part of the problem. I let you in the door because I knew you. I talked to Chris that night because I knew him. Clearly, knowing people leads me to trusting, and that's where I go wrong. He handed her the Christmas present. I wanted to give you this. What is it? She asked and opened it. A present never changed her mind, and right now, she wondered what Brandon intended. She swallowed and stared at the folded green and yellow muslin blanket. Brandon then said, "It was my baby blanket from when I was little. My mom said I took it everywhere. After my parents died, I was in charge of my sister, and she made sure I kept this. This was meant for his own future son or daughter, not her." The engine inside her that was so angry lost all its steam in one moment. It felt like her tears might start again. Why are you giving this to me? He reached for her hand. Last night, we said there might be an us, and I wanted to show you I want both you and your daughter in my life. Brandon, that's sweet. You should have told me about this. The ice around her heart began to melt. No one ever included her in family, and this was a big deal. Tears swelled in her eyes. He shouldn't have spied, but part of her understood. You're right. I'm sorry. The waterworks started again in her eyes. She wiped her cheeks, and without another thought, she reached out and hugged him. I have to learn I can trust you. He massaged her back. We can start with breakfast and then getting to work. We're running late now. Okay, let's go find your movie thief. She swallowed. No one was kinder to her, and right now, she needed that. Brandon didn't need to prove to her that he was better than Chris. There was no comparison. She'd never had a guy half like Brandon, and she wasn't sure how that made her feel. Brandon was awesome. Chapter 8. Now they had closed the door and were in a huge movie studio lot. Brandon unlinked his hand from Eva's and turned toward her. A piece of her brown hair was stuck in her eyelashes, so he brushed it away as he said, "Eva, I'll see you soon." She reached for his waist and held him close, despite the fact they were in a movie studio and everyone there technically worked for him. He never wanted to leave her side. Where are you going? The trust in her eyes was back, and earlier this morning, the wall around his heart had crumbled. Eva deserved far better than he could offer her, and so did her daughter. He told her the truth. To talk to the director. I want him to know, in person, I approved the changes. She let go of his waist, and it felt like he went adrift at sea. Okay, I have to go into blocking out a scene with Jennifer. We're supposed to film it as my first scene for the movie today. He reached for her wrist to keep her close. Wait, you didn't tell me. I didn't? She said while she came back toward him. Without delay, he closed his eyes and claimed her lips as his own. She kissed him, wrapping her arms around him. He felt like he could conquer anything. Once the kiss ended, she said, "We were preoccupied last night." True. Again, he brushed his hand against her soft cheek. I'll watch with the director. Okay. She looked at the ground and then left. The way her hips swayed captivated him. Once she'd left, he went in search of the director. Again, he was with a cameraman, discussing angles, at least from what he could see with the hand gestures. When he approached, the cameraman stepped away. "Dmitri, we have to talk." He crossed his arms. Normally, producers are not on set every day. Dmitri Petrov had a reputation for making quality movies, and this was his hope to win an Oscar. However, he was also known to be temperamental. "I wanted to tell you the script is great, and I already sent it up for approval, so you can start shooting." A huge smile grew on his face as he reached out to shake his hand. Normally, producers are not so agreeable to changes. "Glad you're here." Right. Now it was time to confess and talk. Dmitri was no longer on the suspect list and would be the best ally on this movie set. "I also need to talk to you about the budget." He stood taller. "We cannot cut production back and make this good." Every director would say that. Brandon took out a copy of a spreadsheet and handed it to Dmitri. "Are you ordering special effects that add up to this?" He reached up and massaged his glasses, like that might somehow make him focus. "What is this?" Brandon pointed to today's date and the continuation of those costs. "How much your movie will go over budget with special effects?" Dmitri stared at the art department doors. "Let me investigate." No one was better suited. A loud thud echoed from behind him. He turned around as the studio ricocheted with screams. Dimitri's eyes went wide. "Eva." Brandon couldn't breathe. He asked, "What was that?" "I don't know," Dmitri answered, and they both took off running. His heart sped up while he thought about Eva in any sort of danger. He slowed down when he saw the circle of people, and she wasn't one of them. He tapped people's shoulders and said, "Let me through." For a split second, his heart almost stopped and he felt his body grow cold. Eva lay unconscious in Jennifer's lap. He dove down beside her and took Eva's hand while he asked, "Jennifer, what happened?" Jennifer shivered but continued to hold Eva's head. "She tripped. We need a doctor. She's unconscious." Brandon stated the obvious. He gently brushed Eva's skin. She grew warmer, so he massaged her shoulder while he said, "Eva, sweetie, Brandon?" Her eyes blinked and slowly focused on his while she sat up. "What happened?" Jennifer pointed to a spot a few feet away. "There was a hole in the floor. Neither of us saw it. That's the hole I ordered cut and filled with pillows, so nothing happened to Eva's baby," Dmitri answered fast. "I don't know where the sign is. It's supposed to be there." Once the hole was filled with pillows for the fight scene, her baby would be safe. But for now, all that mattered was Eva was okay. He helped her stand while she said, "Thanks, Jen. I think you caught me." Jen put her hand on her hip. "Despite the rumors, I'm not all bad." She helped Eva straighten her shirt. "Now get to the doctors and then get back here. We have a scene to film." Eva nodded her head. "Brandon," everyone stared at him. He took her hand and she said, "Let's go." The crowd parted to let them through. When he made it to his car, he opened the door for her and asked, "To the transformer doctor?" She made a sound his mother would have made at one of his jokes. He ran around and let himself into the driver's side. "I don't have another, and just because his name is Bentley doesn't relate him to a car." "You seem okay," he said, starting the engine. They drove down the street while she said, "I'm worried about the baby." Jennifer had seemed like she jumped in there to catch Eva as best she could. She'd get a Christmas bonus if Eva was okay. A few minutes later, he parked the car and helped her inside. Once the doors closed to the office, he said, "We're here. Sit down and I'll check us in." The nurse looked at both of them and asked, "Is this your wife's first visit with us?" "Right. Doctors usually worked on appointments." He leaned forward on the table to make eye contact with the woman. "We need to see someone today. Eva hasn't steadily seen a doctor, and she fell today on set. Let me talk to the doctor about fitting her in. Give me 1 minute and fill out these forms." She stood and went to talk to someone while he filled out self-pay. Eva wasn't on any insurance yet, as her paperwork for the movie would take a week. His debit card could handle it, but it would be good for him to speed up the papers if he could. When the nurse came back, she nodded and took the paperwork while he said, "Thank you." She typed everything in, ran his debit card, and a moment later pointed to the door. "Please go through. The nurse will see you now." He turned and saw she was already standing up. "Eva, you're ready." As she neared the door, she stared at him and held out her hand. "Please come." He refused to budge a muscle. "Are you sure?" "Yes." She waved her hand for him to hold it, and he went to go with her. A few minutes later, they were in the ultrasound room with a tech, and they'd put jelly on her belly. She waved her wand and said, "Here is your baby. She looks healthy." He stared at the television screen. Nothing he produced ever made him feel like this. It felt like he saw his future. Eva asked the nurse, "So, my fall didn't hurt her?" The nurse shook her head. "The doctor will talk to you more, but the best thing you can do is stay calm. Many times, it's stress that hurts far more than the actual fall. Let's get her measurements, and the doctor will want all the files from your last one, so we have a few forms to fill out before you see Dr. Bentley." They handed him the papers, but he couldn't stop staring at the television screen with the baby girl inside Eva on it. The nurse said, "Daddy, your girl is going to be great." He didn't have the energy to even blink away, though he heard her tell Eva, "Your boyfriend is already in love with his daughter." She turned the screen to a picture of her baby and left. He clutched the papers in his hand and eventually turned to Eva when she said, "Brandon?" "Yeah?" He took her hand. She used his arm to help her stand. "I'm glad you're here. I have to get dressed." "Right." She went behind a screen and he began to fill out the forms. "What was the name of your last doctor?" She pointed to her pocketbook from behind the screen. "Dr. Wei. Take my phone and find her." He opened it and realized she didn't have a password set up. Anyone could steal her information, but Eva wasn't thinking about crime. He found the doctor without comment and copied the information. A few minutes later, he filled out the rest of the form and she walked out from behind the screen, fully dressed. He was about to slip her phone into her bag when it rang. He looked at it and said, "Chris is calling you again." "Ignore," she said, and hit decline as she took it from him. He stood up with the papers. "Does he always call you this often?" She looped her arm around his. "I told you, he never acknowledged me at all until I was out to dinner with you and Calliope." Ice cold penetrated his spine while he thought about Eva being prey to Chris. His sister had had a narrow escape, and he couldn't let anything happen to Eva or her baby. He opened the door and said, "Eva, I want you to think about marrying me." "What?" A blush stained her cheeks. He led her down the hall. "As my wife, I can protect you as my own." She refused to look at him when she asked, "Do you want to marry me or protect me?" "Both." He'd not lie to her. Perhaps that wasn't what she wanted to hear as she dropped her head even lower. She squeezed his hand at the next door. "Let's see the doctor and go back to the set and talk tonight." Right. Now had not been the best time. The doctor stood when they entered. "Hello, Dr. Bentley," he said. "Now you both look relieved," he said with a smile. The doctor was their age and clearly worked out. Eva plopped in her seat and said, "The nurse said my baby was okay." "Yes." Brandon took the seat next to her. The doctor went to his desk and asked her, "What prenatal vitamins are you on?" "You left it blank." She fished out a bottle in her bag and said, "I bought these." He looked at it and shrugged. "I'll write a prescription for the ones I recommend." He typed in his computer and a second later stared at them both. "So, do you have any questions for me?" Brandon had to ask. "Now she's your patient. Can she come in anytime she wants to see a nurse?" He said, "For a fall, absolutely, but try to avoid those." The doctor handed her the prescription. "Next time you visit, it will be less paperwork. Do you know what hospital you want to deliver at?" She shook her head. Most of his friends' babies were born at Mount Sinai, but that was years ago. Brandon asked, "Where do you work?" The doctor handed him a paper with 3 hospital addresses. "These are the 3 I'm affiliated with. Take the tours and let me know." "Tours?" Eva really was having a baby. Life was so clear at the moment. Without a blink, the doctor told her, "Your girl is doing great, and at our scheduled appointment next week, we'll do a full workup." "Thanks again," she said, standing. He followed her out the door. Once they made it closer to his car and the bright light of day, he said, "Eva, I've never asked a woman to marry me." She pressed her lips together and opened her own car door. "I said we'd talk tonight." "Right." He opened the driver's seat. Even with Grace, he had never asked. She bought herself a ring and told him they were engaged. With Eva, he felt like he was in uncharted territory. The only thing he knew for sure was that he wanted to keep her and her baby safe. Chapter 9. Eva tapped her foot on the floor and stared at the pillow-filled hole in the floorboards. She and Jen had blocked the scene without her falling again. But it was time to get real. The cameras were ready. Dimitri stood, and everyone waited on her. She swallowed and put her foot in the hole. "So you want me to dive into the hole on purpose this time?" The director glanced at Brandon and said, "We can film this after the holidays if you prefer." No, this was her job, and who knew? Perhaps she'd break out into film and make more money than in plays. She took her foot out and turned toward Jen again. "No, it's fine. And Jen, don't be afraid to hit me. I've always preferred getting stuck into my role." One slap or punch to the face wasn't going to hurt her, and it would look better for the camera too. But Jen's face went white. "You were just in the hospital. My baby is fine. Let's do this," she told Jen, and for the scene she turned and picked up the gun. Jennifer came into the kitchen and Eva pointed it at her. The director gave the signal and Jennifer shrieked, "You're crazy. That's what he'll think when he finds you," she said, stepping closer while unlocking the gun. Acting out this scene in the movie was a perfect way to start. Jennifer cried on cue and pushed the chair in front of her. The baby isn't his. Good. Eva began to forget her life and become her character, Laura. She kicked the chair and motioned for Jen to go into the next room. "It should be. You're in the way." She didn't move. Eva grabbed her and pointed the gun at her temple while she pushed her. "Let me go," Eva begged and dragged her feet. Laura wouldn't cry, so Eva struggled as hard as she could. This was it. She was about to fall. She steeled her legs to brace herself. Jen lightened her grip, and they both turned as they blocked it out, and Jen punched her in the nose. Good. Eva refused to look at the hole as she threw herself onto her mark. Luckily, the pillows worked. Actually, it felt nice to lay on her belly like this. If she could, she'd stay. But Laura never gave up. She pushed herself up on her knees and shot the gun. An explosion on the set broke one of the plates on the cabinet. Jen screamed again, but Eva pulled her forward and threw her into the next room. "You're weak." "No." Jen's screams echoed in the kitchen where Eva still stood and acted triumphant. She went to the stove and poured herself a cup of tea. Jen screamed in the other room, "I'll get out. It's good you think so." Eva smiled into her teacup as she sat on a dining room chair. "No," Jen screamed. Eva just laughed and rubbed her belly while she drank her cup. "Cut," Dimitri called. The scene was finished. Brandon went into the kitchen and hugged her. "Eva, you were so evil. Laura's fun," she admitted and hugged him back. In real life, she'd never be like this. Though for Brandon, she might need to show more strength. His cedar smell calmed her and let her dream of home. "Good news," Dimitri called out. "We did it in one take. That's a wrap." The crowd cheered and everyone shouted, "Merry Christmas." Brandon massaged her back and then said, "Let me talk to Dimitri, and then we'll celebrate Christmas." "Okay," she said and rubbed her belly. Brandon walked 2 feet from her to talk to the director. She turned away but could hear every word. "I'm hiring a new assistant director after the new year. Hopefully I'll find someone I trust and that you like." A moment later, Brandon's hand was on the small of her back. She turned and smiled at the director again. "Happy holidays to you both." For once, everything felt great. Brandon walked her off the set. They passed wardrobe toward the front door to go outside. "What's an assistant director do?" The assistant is the one that keeps the budget for me on a day-to-day basis. A few weeks ago, the one I hired had a huge fallout with Dimitri, and he quit. He unlocked the door for her, and the brightness of the evening shone in her face. She let him lead her to his car. Sounds good, and it sounds like you solved your problem. They made it to the highway when her phone rang. As she picked it up to look at the screen, Brandon said, "Chris is calling you again." She silenced the phone, as this one didn't have the decline option, and turned toward Brandon. "Let's ignore the call. What are our plans for tonight?" Another ring pierced the air. Brandon made a tisk sound. He's not giving up easily. Brandon pulled into a parking lot of a nice hotel near the ocean. The blue waters normally calmed her, but her nerves were a wreck. He's not getting the hint. Brandon unbuckled his seatbelt. "Answer while I make our reservation." She reached out for him while she answered. "Don't leave me." "Never," he whispered and stayed in his seat. "Chris," she answered. "What do you want?" "Eva, my lawyers are drafting custody papers. I want you to consider letting me have my child outright." Her pulse raced again, and she thought about what the nurse said about staying calm. She squeezed Brandon's hand. "Absolutely not. No one is taking my baby from me. Eva, I'll pay you $5 million to walk away. It would be easier for you than a court battle. No amount of money would ever be enough." Her face fell, but thankfully she saw Brandon was right here. She needed to stop the stress, but she yelled, "Don't call me again." She hung up the phone, and a second later her tears flowed down her cheeks. Brandon hugged her, and the smell of cedar was like a wonder drug. She hugged him back, feeling the tension dissipate. "What happened?" "Brandon, can we go home? I look a mess." She wiped her face, but felt more tears. This time, she wasn't angry. It was more about having Brandon here, which was stupid. "Of course, tell me what happened." She pursed her lips. "He offered me $5 million to walk away from the baby. My baby is not for sale. She's all the family I've ever had in the world." "I heard you say no. Everything's going to be okay, Eva." "I'm scared." Her hands shook. "He also threatened me with court." "Eva, you're not weak," he said, and took her hand in his. "At least stop shaking." Right. Now she had to tell him the truth. She took a deep breath. "I'm not strong, Brandon. I've never been strong. I survive because I'm good at putting things out of my mind, but his family has money." He brushed his hand against her cheek, wiping away tears. "So do I, and so do most of your friends." She didn't, though. That was the problem. "I can't ask my friends. This isn't their fault." He drove from the beach down Collins. For a few minutes, neither of them said anything. He turned back on the highway for a moment until he reached his exit. As he turned into his street, he said, "We're almost home." With his house in sight, she sighed. "Brandon, I'm scared." "You can marry me," Brandon said, turning into the driveway. The gate was still closing behind them. The view of the sun setting on the water was only there because Brandon technically lived on an island. Her heart beat slow and sure. Her heart took over for 1 second while she reached for her door. "I want to marry you because you love me and I love you. I don't want to, because we're not there, and this whole situation is my fault." He followed her out of the car. She hugged herself and went to the front door of the house. "Eva, stop." She turned toward him and shook her head. "I knew Chris had dated your sister. I didn't check with her first." "You weren't friends with her," Brandon said, and joined her. "I still knew. Everything that's happened could have been prevented if she was a better person. Her problems would have never happened if she'd been good. Eva, you need to stop thinking you can solve the world's problems." Her breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" Wild parrots sang behind them and almost made what Brandon said a concert. "You don't have to pay people when a show closes." He reached for her shoulder and held her. "You don't have to fight Chris alone, and you are not responsible for my sister almost marrying him. All that matters is your baby and your health." With Brandon, she couldn't hide anything. She felt her tears returning and couldn't just blame the pregnancy this time. "Brandon, that's the rub. I'm not a fan of me. I hide in my roles and pretend for a show that my life is the character I play. Eva Bishop has never been that interesting. He brushed her tears off her cheeks and whispered, Eva, you are the most interesting woman I've ever met. Don't sell yourself short. Without another word, his lips met hers and it felt like she was home. He was everything she ever wanted and never had. If he said he was in love with her, she'd have told him yes. She hugged him when the kiss ended and said, Brandon, just hold me. For Christmas, let's watch a movie and escape. Eva. He choked on his words and unlocked the door. She reached for his shoulder. Yes? He opened it for her. You're worth waiting for. I want you to know that. Thanks, she said, and went inside. Right now, curling her feet up and blocking everything out except the two of them was what she wanted. Chapter 10. When he woke up, Brandon's muscles ached. His arms were wrapped around Eva while they were on his couch. He tried to move without waking her. She sighed and moved too. He stretched and in silence stared at her in awe. He had no idea how long he'd watched her before she opened her blue eyes and gazed at him. His face felt warm. We slept on the couch. It's fine. She tugged her shirt higher, though she was still covered. He reached out and gently placed his hand on hers as she pressed her palm on the couch. You don't understand. What? She stared at him. He stretched again. I never sleep more than a few hours. You don't? She said, standing. Right. It was Christmas morning. Next year, he'd get a tree if Eva was still with him. He felt a shiver down his spine and took his hand off hers. Not since my parents died. I've functioned on a few hours' sleep since the police knocked on my college dorm and told me I was now in charge of my 16-year-old sister. She hugged him. I'm sorry, that had to be hard. Sleep felt nice, he said, and wrapped his arms around her. For a minute, neither of them moved. Finally, she let go, brushed her hand on his 5 o'clock shadow and winked. I'll get us breakfast. He went and took a shower. Clean and dressed, he returned to the living area and heard Eva humming in the kitchen. He continued, but halfway there stopped at the kitchen entrance when his doorbell rang. Did you order something to be delivered? He asked and stared at her curves. Eva was gorgeous. She turned off the stove and shook her head at him. On Christmas morning? No, coffee is almost done. Good. He walked to the security cam in the living room. His entire body became hollow. He held his breath for a minute and then called out, It's Grace. Who? Eva came out of the kitchen and stared at him with an openness he never saw in Hollywood. His heart beat faster, and then he looked at his shoes. Grace would hate his black leather shoes on in the house. My ex-fiancée. She's here. Buzz her in. I'll get coffee. Without understanding, Eva walked to the kitchen. He called to her as she walked away. Eva, don't go far. A second later, he opened his front door. Grace left him, and at the time he had felt broken. Now he stared into her brown eyes. He no longer felt warm. He missed Eva's blue hues. With no warning, Grace hugged him, and her floral bouquet perfume overwhelmed. I'm here. With that much perfume, he'd not forget. He pulled away from her and stared at the door. Eva would be out in a minute. Grace, what are you doing here? She pouted her painted red lips. Brandon, it's Christmas. And he hadn't spoken to Grace since she left him Thanksgiving the year before last. She reached for him, but he shrugged away. I made a mistake with Charles. There was too much water under the bridge, and he didn't care enough to start again. She'd left him and her actions had left nothing to be desired. It was done. Clearly, look, Grace, it's Christmas. You said that, she interrupted, and this time took his hand. At one time, her presence made him happy. He froze. Don't. Grace, I found someone else. She pouted again. You came to Miami for your sister's wedding and then stayed to produce a movie. Whoever she is must be new, and we both know you still love me. Without invitation, she launched herself at him, and their lips met in a kiss. She tasted like stale coffee. He stopped a second later, but he heard footsteps behind him. Eva must have heard or seen. He untangled his hands from his ex and pointed toward his gate. "Grace, get off. You need to go." "Brandon, I love you," she said, and tried to hold him. This was it. Grace was the past. He shook his head. "I don't love you." "Eva," he called out as he closed the door behind her. He heard her retch in the bathroom. She'd seen him. His face felt hot, but he knocked on the door. She called out, "I'm sick to my stomach. I'm leaving in a minute." Eva was the most important person in his life. He called through the door, "Not over, Grace, please." A few seconds later, he heard her splash water on her face, and in a flash, she opened the door. "You kissed her." "No, not on purpose." He shook his head. "She kissed me." Her eyes were as big as saucers. She put her hand on her hip. "You kissed her back. I saw." If he lost Eva, he'd feel lost and alone. He swallowed and prayed the truth was enough. "I realized the only person I want to kiss is you." She blinked and trembled a little. "What?" This was his only shot. He reached out for her shoulder and said, "She kissed me, and the taste of her was stale." "You're not." "I'm not." She closed her eyes. "No, Eva." Then his lips met hers, and this time he felt like the sun that rose from the ocean in the morning. Eva made him feel complete and whole. The world stopped moving, and he was right where he wanted to be. The doorbell rang again and again. Clearly, Grace had more to say. Eva must have thought the same because she said, "She's back. Come with me this time." He offered his arm. She nodded and followed him. However, the second he opened the door, the sun blocked his vision while Eva screamed, "Chris!" This was his house and his property. He took a step forward to ensure the user wasn't on his doorstep. "You not welcome at my house. It's Christmas morning." Chris stared at Eva while he said, "Eva's having my baby, not yours." He fished his cell phone out of his back pocket and searched his phone. "Leave now. I'm calling security." "Leave me alone, Chris," Eva said while he dialed security and typed in his code that there was an issue. Soon Chris would be gone. In the meantime, Chris said to Eva, "We both know until you hooked up with Brandon that you didn't want our baby. Once Brandon leaves you, what will you do? If you give me the baby, I'll ensure he or she lacks for nothing." Eva's face went white. He placed his phone in his pocket. "Go inside, Eva. Security has been notified." Eva instead went and stood behind him. "Chris, I don't know why you lied to Brandon. My baby is the only thing in the world I want, and I won't let you have it. Now go." "It." She always said girl. His ears buzzed, but he didn't say anything. He pointed to the car that stopped in front of his gate. "Security is here, Chris. Get off my property." Chris curled his hands into a ball and stepped closer. "You're a smug jerk, Brandon Campbell. Your sister was the only reason I pretended to be nice to you." Brandon pushed forward and refused to let Chris get past him. "Just like you pretended to love her while you stole her money, and now you think you can steal Eva's baby. But she's smarter than you give her credit for." Without another word, Chris landed his fists against his cheek and nose. Brandon felt the blood rush down his nose, but it didn't matter. He brushed his face and punched him square in the nose. Chris fell backwards. If you're going to start a fight, know who you're starting with. Cool heads often win fights. In the corner of his eye, he saw security. He waved his hands for the two men near the gate. "Come in." A few minutes later, he walked inside and locked the door and heard Eva crying. He followed her to the kitchen and asked, "Are you okay?" She said as he put his hand on her back, "I'm fine." She assessed his face like his mother once did and glanced up and down. She covered her lips while she gasped. A second later, she walked away and returned with some frozen peas from the freezer. "Your nose. Let's put some ice on it." "I'm fine," he said, but he liked that she held the bag firm. She took care of him. He swallowed and said, "Here." She moved the bag and said, "Brandon, thank you." Her thanks weren't necessary. He reached up and brushed her cheek. Her skin was soft. "Don't worry about it. I'm sorry I brought you out there. I assumed Grace had come back." She scooted closer to him and brushed her hip on his. "We're a mess, you and I." He needed confirmation that she trusted him. "Why did you call your daughter it?" She then put the frozen peas back in the freezer. "I never told him anything. I certainly never told him what I was having. He's not part of my life." He walked over and placed his hand on the small of her back. "Eva, relax, I believe you." She leaned closer. "No one normally does." The smell of roses wafted through him. "Eva, don't let others ruin our Christmas." "Okay," she said, hugging him. He kissed her forehead. "Good, now get dressed." "Where are we going?" she asked as she pulled away. He bowed. "It's a surprise." Her eyes widened. "I'm not big on surprises. I couldn't get you much in terms of presents for under the tree, but I have something planned for us. Indulge me?" "Okay, give me 5 minutes." With a smile, she walked out of the room. Brandon's heart grew in his chest. Today, she'd see what he'd planned. This was the best Christmas present he could offer her. Chapter 11. Brandon seemed so happy while he drove. Eva uncrossed her arms and tried to let all the people who had interrupted their morning dissipate from her thoughts. The thought of Chris coming at her and stealing her baby sent shivers down her spine. She wiggled in her seat for more comfort and stared at Brandon's handsome profile. His brown hair and straight nose made her wish he was her own fairy tale prince. She'd be happy with him. A second later, she blinked and saw the entrance sign to where he was pulling in his car. She leaned closer to him. "Brandon, are we at Butterfly World?" "Yes, come," he said, parking his car at the front. They were the only car in the lot, and the place felt closed. She pinched a piece of her blue dress and showed him while she stood. "I'm all dressed up." He took both of her hands and led her inside. "Yes, I rented this for you." "You what?" she asked, following his direction. The door was open for them, and he led her through where they normally took admission tickets. At the door to the atrium where the butterflies lived, he led her inside. "Come, what is this?" she asked as they passed the netting. Once inside, she saw the Christmas lights that lined the handrails and how the butterflies flew everywhere. "Oh wow, this is beautiful." Her ears perked up to classical music as they walked forward. "What is that music?" He pointed ahead of them. "Right outside the gate, I placed a string quartet." "A band?" This was serious. She twirled and stared at the flowers, trees, and butterflies of every color. "Everywhere is beautiful." Near a gazebo, he stopped and found a box in his back pocket. "Last time I asked you, I didn't do it right." Her heart beat so fast while he went down on one knee. "Ask me what?" He reached for her hand and she stared down into his gaze. "Eva, in high school, even though you never noticed me, I thought you were the prettiest girl I ever saw." Perhaps this wasn't a proposal. She ran her hands in his thick hair. "I was clearly stupid then." "Wait," his words held her still, and he took her hand again. "Maybe it was." She stilled and swallowed. "Okay." For a second, she couldn't breathe. He said, "Since meeting you again, I've realized through all of this that my sister was always right." Okay, now she was confused. She blinked. What? Butterflies flew between them and she shifted away to give them room. Once they were gone, he took her hand again. "I'm messing up. I'm slightly nervous." "A butterfly's landed in your hair," she said and reached for it. It moved on its own and flew to a nearby tree as if staring down at both of them. This time, he opened the ring box and displayed the biggest diamond she'd ever seen. All her other friends wanted simplicity, but the ring Brandon showed her was made to display. "Eva, the other day you asked if I wanted to marry you because I loved you, or because I was trying to protect you. I've thought about nothing else since, and I figured that on Christmas there was nothing I wanted more than to ask you right." "What?" The band played the instrumental from Spend My Life With You. Brandon sure knew how to set a scene. He took the ring out and handed it to her. "I love you. Will you marry me? She tugged him to get up. He stood, and she hugged him. You love me? For real? You love me? His nod was all she needed because she kissed his cheek. He took her offered kiss, and his lips tasted like heaven itself. A moment later, he brushed his thumb against her cheek. Eva Bishop? Yes, I do. So, what do you say? Tears formed in her eyes. Brandon, I love you too. He stilled, and she could feel his heartbeat was fast under her hand. Will you marry me and be my wife for the rest of our lives? She threw her hands around his waist, leaned her head on his shoulder, and hugged him. If there was anyone in the world she wanted to be with, it was Brandon. The tears in her eyes washed down her face while she said, Yes, Brandon. He hugged her and kissed the top of her head. You will? Yes, she repeated and smiled. Thank God, he said and leaned down. Her eyes flickered closed, and he kissed her again. This time, even the butterflies disappeared, and all that existed was their kiss. He let her go and jumped in the air, smacking his feet together. Her head jerked back. What are you doing? With the sway of his hips, he held out his hand for her to join him. Dancing, join me. Jumping cannot be good for my girl, she said while he led her into a classic waltz. Over his shoulders, she saw a small water fountain where butterflies gathered. How did you ever think about this place as a setting to propose? He pinched her backside playfully. I'm a movie producer. You'll be okay living half of our lives in LA? With Brandon, anything was possible. She was in love. Maybe I'll land a few more movie deals post-pregnancy. He nodded his head. Eva, you stole my heart already. You draw all my attention. It won't shock me at all if you're the breakout star soon. She settled into the dance. Brandon, I don't know how I lived without you. Now you won't have to. His words rang like a promise in her ears. If he was right, perhaps it was possible to get to her happily ever after and to trust at least him. Until Brandon, she had always thought that dream the stuff of fairy tale. But now, anything might happen. Chapter 12. Eva's heart raced wildly as she glanced around the house. With the sun setting, the room had an almost orange glow, and she realized this was now her home. She sat on the couch and just stared at the white walls. No place had ever been a permanent home for her, for as far back as she could think. Brandon uncorked a fancy sparkling juice and poured it like it was champagne near the bar. Again, she stared at the wall and hugged herself. This was real. She had a place she belonged. A ring pierced the air. She stood up. This time, she checked the monitor and saw that Grace was back. She called out, Brandon, your ex is at our door again. He placed the champagne glasses on the coffee table and stared at her. I told her to leave. She has a bag, she said, standing and rubbing her belly. Brandon placed his hand on her spine, and she walked easier to the front door. When they were together, Brandon opened it. He stared at his ex, while he kept Eva in his arms. Grace, this is my fiancée, Eva. She felt a little strange when he pushed her forward. Grace's eyes widened and she stepped back. Fiancé? I didn't know it was that serious. Eva held up her hand and showed the gorgeous ring. Brandon proposed. I said yes. Oh, Grace said and whistled at the sight of the ring. Then her face grew red. Wow, that Chris guy was wrong. Brandon hugged Eva's waist a little tighter. What? Grace stared at him and tugged the metal handle on her suitcase to roll it. He said you weren't in love, Brandon, but if you asked Eva to marry you, then you must be. You never asked me. I hope you're happy. Chris had threatened her and tried to ruin her relationship with Brandon. He was childish, and she felt herself getting angry. She closed her eyes and tried to calm down. Brandon asked, Did Chris pay you to come out here? Grace shook her head. He flew me out. He said you involved yourself in his life and he wanted what was best for everyone. Brandon would have an idea what to do, but he shouldn't get in another fight. She turned and hugged his side. We have to go. Thank you for telling us, Grace. Grace picked up her phone and called a car while she said, I'm going to find a place in Miami and stay a while, but I'll stay away from you both. I just thought I'd tell you, Brandon called out. Stay away from Chris Summers. Grace nodded her head. Don't worry about that. From what I can see, he smells like trouble. A few seconds later, a car service picked Grace up from the front, and Brandon closed the door. The handle locked loudly and rang in the air. A moment later, he led her to the juice he'd poured and said, Eva, I need to deal with Chris. Deal with Chris. No, he wasn't worth letting into their lives. Her heart raced while Brandon opened his tablet that was on a nearby table. What are you intending? A restraining order, he said while he typed. Good. If he stayed away from them, she and her daughter would be safe. What are the grounds? The email sent as his tablet made a flying sound. Brandon picked up the champagne glasses. Fighting on private property for one. Don't worry about him, ever again. She took the offered glass but asked, How can you be sure? Summers might have money to scare you with, but he's no threat to me. She held her belly. I don't care about him. My biggest concern is my baby and protecting her. Will you help me? I will think of her as my own. I already do, he said, clinking her glass with his. This was one of the many reasons she'd said yes. Brandon might not be the biological father, but he was the man who would be a dad. She sipped her sparkling grape juice. Then Chris doesn't matter. I love you, and I love you, he said as he gulped his drink. He placed it on the table beside him. So can I call my sister and let her know we're getting married? Right. While it was Christmas, the closest thing she had to a family would be the best present. She gulped her drink and placed her glass next to his. Tell her and Michael to meet us at the coffee shop tonight. I'll call Sandy, Wyatt, Penny, and Jay, as my friends have always been the closest thing I had to a family. Until you arrived, Penny and Jay were eating pastries while Sandy and Wyatt sipped coffee as they arrived. Penny, Jay, Sandy, Wyatt, and Michael were all so different, but this was her family. She stood with Brandon and ordered drinks from the bar. While Brandon was waiting, she walked over and hugged her friends without letting them see the ring. Sandy stared at her hand and tried to peek. What's going on? Brandon walked with both of their glasses. She shook her head and hid her hand in his back pocket. We have to wait for Michael and Calliope, Penny said. Well, you're happy and glowing, and this isn't just pregnancy. They took their seats. A minute later, Michael and Brandon's sister walked in the door. He quickly said, Calliope is here. They waited until the last group settled into their usual corner, and finally Eva held up her hand. So, we're getting married. Sandy took Calliope's hand, then all three of them showed off their diamonds. It seems we're all getting married. Alice held up her matching diamond and wedding band, and all four of them laughed. Sandy asked, Want to coordinate which holiday we plot our weddings around? Eva blinked. What? Calliope nodded her head. We have a lot of the same friends. It might be fun to plan out which holiday each of us wants so we don't step on each other's toes. They were well ahead of her in thinking about their weddings. Sandy said, Wyatt and I want Valentine's. Calliope stared at Brandon and lowered her lashes. I want April, as Easter is close, and our mom always loved Easter. Good enough reason to agree, and besides, she honestly had no wedding plans in her head at all yet. She rubbed her belly. Good, because I want to be a June bride, and I can work on getting my figure back by then too. 3 weddings, Penny said and kissed her husband's cheek. Miami is going to have quite the social calendar next year. Michael then banged on the table for attention and held up his coffee cup. To all of us, and new beginnings. Eva shook her head and wrapped her arms around Brandon's neck. Soon she wouldn't be able to sit in his lap, but that wasn't today. She scooted on him and rubbed his 5 o'clock shadow. No, to finding the people we love. Yes, to marrying the men smart enough to love us, Calliope said, turning to kiss Michael. Sandy hugged Wyatt. And to living happily ever after. Eva silently agreed, though she never thought this would happen to her. but it seemed funny. Even she had a chance at happily ever after. And one day, everyone else might have too. Now that she was with Brandon, she realized anything was possible. Thank you for reading. I hope you loved Brandon and Eva's romance. The series might end now, but you can find out what happens to Roxy and how one horrible Christmas leads Het to love with Harry Hughes in Tempting Harry. Or you can start my whole new series about 12 amazing single brothers, starting with the preview next page. Or order the one that got away now. And to find out about new books, sign up for my newsletter, https://victoriapinder.com, also by Victoria Pinder. The Marshall Family Saga. Favorite crush, favorite mistake, favorite sin, favorite scandal. The Steele series. Rocking player, ruthless financier, wicked cowboy, powerful prince, cocky MD Scottish seducer, legendary rock star, charming boyfriend, fierce fighter, treasured guardian, French doctor, the House of Morgan, secret crush, secret bet, secret wish, secret dad, secret hair, secret tryst, secret date, secret Romeo, secret caress, secret bridesmaid, secret admirer, secret cowboy, secret mistress, secret Cinderella, secret lover, secret tycoon, secret enemy. Visit victoriapinder.com for the complete list of books.